Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? Well, in the girlfriend's car today, so it looks relatively newer, and it's raining, so you might be able to hear the pitter-patter of rain on the roof and on the window, so hopefully that's not too distracting. But I wanted to answer what I thought was a really good question. It was kind of relevant based on some of the videos I've been making lately, and so here we are back to talking about D&D a little bit. I'm a member of a Facebook group called Old School Gaming Rocks, and every once in a while, you'll see a post come up on your feed. And I saw one yesterday, must have been posted a week ago, by a poster named Chris Humphreys. And I figured it was a pretty good question. It deserved a good answer. I'm not sure if I can give it a good answer, but I can give it my answer. And it relates to some of the things I've been talking about lately. He said, "I'm relatively new to OSR. I really fully started in D&D 3.0. For those of you that prefer AD&D to BX, or BECMI or OD&D, why is that? As a player and a GM, I like that there are more choices for spells and classes, but is that it? Is there something more? With me looking back at OSR, I of course put all these games in the same bucket since they weren't slowly introduced to me over time." So, what about an answer to that question? It's interesting, and the reason I'm thinking about this a lot is because of those conversations I had with Ron Edwards, the video series where he's talking about finding D&D, and the idea that as I came back to the hobby some years ago now, and found myself facing games that I did not recognize or did not like, I retreated to the OSR camp, and I found my people, and only to find that in many ways we were a little fractious because we had our own preferences. I'm not going to go into the history of TSR D&D and all that kind of stuff because that's irrelevant, but they produced several different games that were all called D&D. So, let's split them up just a little bit. Well, there's OD&D, which is arguably like the little brown books and the white box. Fall into that category. So 74 D&D. There's 1978 Holmes Basic, and there's the 1977 to 79 first edition AD&D. It wasn't called first edition until there was a second edition, by the way. There's the 1981 BX Molde D&D, my favorite. There is BCMI, which became more or less the Rules Cyclopedia, Menser Basic, and there is second edition. I think I didn't leave anything out, did I? Doesn't really matter. So, why would you choose one over the other? It goes back to the idea that Ron and I talked about, that various people found certain things essential to the Dungeons and Dragons experience. There was something in our history or something we gravitated to as individual gamers, like this. Yeah, this is it. This is the game. This is what makes the game special to me. And these various games, in some ways, are almost like homunculi. They're parts of the game that are exaggerated and parts of the game that are diminished. So why would you choose one over the other? This is not saying some are good and some are bad. They just have different feels to them. Something like OD&D, it's very, very simple. It's very, very bare bones. The stats don't mean an awful lot. The spell descriptions are very sparse. You fill in the gaps. It is great for people that want to fill in the gaps. That was kind of the entire intent of that game, is that you make most of this stuff up. Here's this blank concrete wall. You draw the little gargoyles on it. If you go from OD&D group to OD&D group, you will see that there's all kinds of house rules written in there to fill in a lot of those gaps. And it's funny because you can kind of borrow from the different rule sets. I think if you looked around and tried to find people that played any one of these rule sets completely rules as written, you would have a hard time finding a lot of people that do it, because we've all kind of added little things or yanked things from one game for another that we liked a little bit better. And a lot of times what happens is, now that I'm going down this tangent, is that you've done it for so long, you forget that's not really in the rules. There are things that I've done, as a game master in Dungeons and Dragons, and somebody asks me, where's the rule for that in the AD&D book or the BX book? And I look back and I find, you know what? It's not there. I've been doing it for 30 some odd years. It was probably in a Dragon magazine in 1983. I read, what is that, 35 years ago? Anyhow. Something like Holmes Basic. That's kind of like the more cogent version. Eric Holmes took a look at that, and part of what they had him do was, can you make this more readable and understandable? That's not the entire reason, but anyhow, let's go with this. It's a very easy to read. It's very similar to OD&D, but it's very, very well laid out. And it only goes up to level 3, but like I just talked about, you can figure out what the other level should look like. You can yank the spells from the other games, and a lot of people really like that one. They've because of its elegance and its simplicity. AD&D offers options. It was a game that was made to be very codified, and it was made to be very codified because it was made for tournament play and because TSR made money off tournaments, and they needed people to run the game exactly the same way. It is a game that has a lot of flavor. That is the game I played the most. It's a very, a special place in my heart. I don't know that I'd play it very much again, although I'm probably going to play some Astonishing Swordsmen and Sorcerers of Hyperborea, which is, I am going to play, but it's very close to that in a lot of ways. It has character. It has some options. It is a bit of an unwieldy monster. That's one of the drawbacks. But it gives you all kinds of things. Racist class, or not racist class. You can split, although you can do that in any of the versions, by the way, like I just mentioned. Lots of spells, lots of really flavorful magic items. The whole 9 yards. Pretty neat. But big, complex, unwieldy, not really unified. It's a bit of it's got character, which is one of the reasons I really like it. BX D&D, 1981 Moldvay, the first game I got. And you'll find that a lot of us tend to gravitate back towards those games that we first played because those hold a special place in our heart. That was where the magic was. Not all the time, but this is one that I finally came back to after years and realized that was my favorite version of TSR Dungeons and Dragons. And it is very elegant. The mechanics make a lot of sense. The ability scores mean more than they do in something like Holmes Basic or OD&D, but they're very symmetrical. It's very easy to wrap your head around. It's a book that like a kid can read and start running that day, and that an adult can be enjoying like years later. It sounds like an advertisement, doesn't it? But that's what I found out of that system. Very elegant, very streamlined, very easy to tweak if you want to a little bit. If you want to add not racist class or add all the other options from AD&D and all those extra spells, you can do that. In fact, not to sound like an advertisement again, but Labyrinth Lord did all the work for you, and they have this book called the Advanced Edition Companion, or Compendium, whatever the heck it is. You buy that, and it's pretty much done all the heavy lifting for you. Anyhow. And let's see, what else? BECMI, Menser Basic. That is something that I never played. I have a copy of the Rule Cyclopedia, or a clone of the Rule Cyclopedia. I've actually laid eyes on the original one. I've looked at a lot of the material there. It is, once again, a simple and elegant game at first, and then adds a million options. And especially if you come at it from the Rule Cyclopedia side, where these options start to get presented to you in the beginning, with weapons mastery and everything else, it's really neat. It gives you all kinds of options, and it's gargantuan. And it's you can hear my bias coming through, but as a homunculus in a way that it exaggerates all these different options and possible avenues you can go down as a player to tweak the game. And so for people that really like that, it is phenomenal. And let's see, second edition. This is a game, it's hard to hide my bias. This is a game that added a ton of options. People talk a lot about the 1.5 AD&D as well. There are extra books like the Wilderness Survival Guide, the Dungeoneer's Survival Guide, and whatnot. Starting to add more and more rules. Second edition took out a lot of the flavor text. It's a very dry read. They organized it a little bit better so you could find the information. But it is a game. It is AD&D. It is first edition, but with tons of options and very little character. But I know people that absolutely adore it because they want all those various options. So each one of these games, and this is more long-winded than I want to get to, or want it to be rather, is a bit of a homunculus. It exaggerates certain parts of the old school D&D experience, whatever the hell that is, and it diminishes other ones. So for which game is right for you, that's something you have to figure out for yourself. If you decide, hey, I really like this old school OSR type stuff, either the original games or the retro clones, you have to find the ones that really kind of do it for you. Because each one of us comes to the hobby, or to D&D, but to the hobby, with certain things that we either inherently find essential, like this makes role-playing fun, or we discover as we go on that we like certain things. And if you're heading in that direction, you decide, hey, I want to play some of this old school, D&D type stuff, you have to figure out, sometimes through trial and error, what do I really like? Maybe you absolutely dig all these options, or maybe you're like me and I just want it to be simple and elegant. I don't want it to be, super simple, or not so elegant. I want this, the scores to mean a little bit more than they do in OD&D, even though I love the heck out of OD&D. It's hard to make a video like this without inserting bias. But you find, like, where's my sweet spot? Where is something where the game absolutely works for me and pushes the buttons that I want pushed, and doesn't do things that I find to be tedious? And maybe maybe you find making things up tedious, or maybe you find a million options tedious. It's up to you to decide. So that's why people choose one over the other, because despite the fact that a lot of these games feel very similar and are very similar, in some ways they're very, very different. So that's a long answer to a good question.